I'm Stephanie Simmons, and this is The Backstory. Every once in a while, as a journalist, you're given the chance to tell a story that doesn't just live in one moment. It stretches across decades, across generations, and somehow settles softly into the hearts of people we've never met. Today is one of those stories. It's a story that skips through time, carrying with it color, joy, and the kind of sweetness that doesn't fade. It's a story that feels familiar, whether you're 80, 40, 20, or 10. So today we're going to a land not far, far away. That's a different story. This land is much closer to home. It sits quietly on a shelf, and it's made entirely of candy. This is the backstory of Candyland. A story with roots that reach further than you might expect, and a connection to San Diego so heartfelt it just might bring you to tears. Candyland was released 78 years ago and originally sold for just $1. Two authors, Sandra Miller and Margaret Muirhead, were interested in learning more about the origin of this game right here, Candyland. So they wrote an article for the New York Times and are now writing a children's book to share the story of Eleanor Abbott. They couldn't find much about her other than that she had created the game back in 1948 for kids in a San Diego polio ward.
So she could maybe have heard their crying at night. They were isolated from their families. They had to endure tough physical therapy. They had very few toys, maybe a teddy bear. They didn't have any games to play. And of course, it was a very sterile environment. So she must have just spun that in her head and imagined some way to create an escape for these children. So it was after she was recuperating, when she went back home in this little house that she shared with her sister Betty, and she took out some butcher paper, which was like this big paper that you could get that most households had, and just sketched out the game. And then apparently brought it back to the ward and shared it with the kids, and the kids loved it.
They wanted to know more about Eleanor. They tracked down her old San Diego home in the 5,000 block of Monroe Avenue in Talmadge, found the number of the latest owners, and it happened to be that one of News 8's investigative journalists lived in Eleanor's former house. He didn't know much about her past, but connected the authors with a recently retired investigative journalist, Paul Kruger, who also lived in the same neighborhood. They hoped he could help track down neighbors who knew Abbott. And guess what? We have Paul Kruger with us here today. Paul, thank you so much for joining us for this incredible story. So what were your thoughts when you got the call?
Well, of course, I was tremendously intrigued to learn that this woman had lived not but 6 blocks from my house. And so I just started doing the groundwork that I would normally do for a story. And went to the Historical Society to see if they had any records about Eleanor Abbott. I knew they had explained the background about her working in the polio ward, so I contacted the Salk Institute, which of course was the Jonas Salk, the polio vaccine, to find whether there were any survivors, anyone still alive who might have been a patient as a child at that time and may have remembered Eleanor. And I went to the neighborhood and talked with all the existing neighbors. So I was really happy to help them on what seemed to be a really amazing story.
And with your long career and background here in San Diego, I'm sure you knew exactly where to go, but did you have any problems getting any pieces of information for those authors?
It was not easy because of the time. You know, so many years had passed. It's not like you're out on a news story where something just happened and you knock on the door and all the neighbors saw it or they knew people, or, you know, we were talking about something that was 50 years before. So it was difficult to find. I don't believe I found anybody who knew her. I found people who may have heard of her. So there were a lot of obstacles to getting the story, and it wasn't like anybody had written a book or an article or I did go back to the Union Tribune archives, and I found interesting things about the polio epidemic here. But I don't think it was until I found the will and probate information and the death certificate and coroner's report that I actually found real records, you know.
And then that's where the story really unfolded from there.
Yes, because the probate file, so she had no survivors. Her sister had died before she did, so she had left a will that distributed her money, if I remember correctly, to some religious orders and a couple of neighbors or friends, but it had been amended a few weeks before her death, which led to a fight over how the money should be dispersed. And that included a number of people who I didn't know about before, and some of them were still alive. So the way it worked was I was just doing research. This was and is their project, their book, their magazine article. So I would forward to them the contacts that I'd made, and they would talk and interview the people that I found.
But I'm sure on your end, as a storyteller, your entire career, there had to be some level of excitement with what you unfolded. I find so many ironic layers in this. Here is this woman who created this incredible game to bring people together, and it provided such joy for people. And then here, this woman died, a very wealthy woman, but alone and sad.
Oh, yeah. It's it's heartening, and it's encouraging, and it's tragic, on so many levels, absolutely. And, I was really lucky to be able to help them and to learn not only about, this amazing and forgotten story about how this woman created one of the most popular kids games in the country, if not the world, but that she did it from her own experience, and that she went unrecognized for so long.
From what I read, I feel like maybe that is one of the components that is also ironic about it. She was such a humble woman for this game that's now one of America's, still to this day, most popular board games of all time by one of the biggest companies, Milton Bradley. But she was just kind of a quiet woman, and I think she preferred it that way. So when you're searching through generations ago and decades ago, it wasn't just that social media didn't exist. I don't think she wanted much about her because she was so humble.
I think that is true on one level, but as you're saying that, I'm also thinking about, this was like the 40s or 50s or whenever, corporate America, and Milton Bradley wasn't going to give her any credit for this. They buy a game, they market a game. And it was a lot different back then. I think that the media didn't know about her. I wonder if it was today, and someone had made a game like Candyland today and had that kind of backstory, I think there would be a lot of publicity because the company would have wanted to make her story, as this woman who worked in a polio ward, right, a part of the promotion of the game, but they didn't do that back then.
No,
right?
She was a business transaction.
It was just a transaction. They saw whatever they sent her. They said, hey, this could be a big hit. Pay her whatever royalties or whatever and be done with it. So I'm not exactly sure that if Milton Bradley had wanted to use her story as a part of promotion, that she would have resisted. I guess we'll never know.
Yes, we'll never know. That's an interesting side piece of this for sure.
We'll never know.
Yes. Okay, well, the authors were able to get a fuller image of Eleanor by contacting Milton Bradley and by connecting with someone she had babysat that they met through Paul, or you helped with the neighbors at least. Let's hear from them on what they learned.
She's really interesting because she's depicted sometimes like by the Milton Bradley executive who did go out and visit her. So he's another source of information about what she was like. And he describes her as a great gal. She was really down to earth, sort of like a sweet older lady. But we find that she is the head of her household. It's just she and her sister Betty Ann. She had worked in watch repair for a jeweler in San Diego called Baranov's that was downtown. This was a skill she learned from her dad. Um, so that's unusual to have a working woman, but also in this interesting profession, watch repair. Um, and then even after she makes it big with Candyland and the royalties start, I mean, it's a hit within 10 years. It's one of the best-selling games.
Mary also sort of filled out her persona a little bit. She always wore pants and never a dress. She carried a pencil around because she always was doing the crossword. She did the daily crossword. And so she always had a little pencil stub in her pocket, which we loved hearing that detail. It helped us to picture her. And Larry said she was always trying to create another game. But in the end, she was a one-hit wonder who did very well off of this one game. But she clearly had a very busy mind, a very active mind. That kind of, as we said, do-it-yourselfer personality. She wasn't content to sit around the house, and she was very down to earth. She got things done. She was a project woman, and she was really, I think, a very unique person in those times. It's kind of unusual to die as a single woman, to die with $1.8 million in the bank.
So that's what they were able to track down. Now, Paul, we go back to you for this. Tell us what you found in the medical examiner's report.
Well, as I was continuing to do the research, I had in the back of my mind all along that maybe there is a medical examiner's report. In San Diego, if you die in the hospital or you die under the care of a physician, there's generally no autopsy and no medical examiner's report. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't sure I'd find one because I didn't have any idea how she died. And I just emailed the administrative clerk at the medical examiner's office, who I'd worked with over the years that I was a reporter and producer here. And I'd been very familiar with obtaining and reading autopsy reports mm-hmm. and ME reports. And sure enough, she wrote me back and said, we've got the report. And she photocopied it and emailed it to me. I was just looking at it again today, coincidentally. Mm. And so I was surprised, and I thought, well, this will be really interesting. And, on the first page of the report, there's sort of a summary. And it says cause of death, asphyxiation.
So tell us more about that. That was a very sad and macabre mm-hmm. part of this story, but it is part of the past and how, this whole story came about. So tell us her cause of death. Yeah, her cause mm-hmm. of death was suffocation, asphyxiation. Not long after her sister died, apparently she became depressed or, sank into some kind of dark place and ended her own life by putting a plastic bag over her head or perhaps even her entire body right there in the living room of that home where she lived with her sister. And, even though you've read a lot of those things, whenever you read that, it's a surprise and it's saddening. And in this case, it was especially shocking to me because when you work on a story, and you get to know a person, you have a certain image of what they are. And the last thing I would have thought about Eleanor Abbott is that she would have taken her own life. There was no indication in anything I'd read, in the probate file or in any of the interviews that Margaret and her colleague had done. In anything we'd done, did we ever hear that she was depressed, unhappy, that she talked about killing herself. So it came out of nowhere. Mental health struggles were not so widely talked about back then as they are now. But I'm thinking, as I'm reading her story, this woman, what a strong woman. She survived polio.
Right.
She survived polio, and she was such a giver and a lover and a thinker of others. And then here to learn about her cause of death and the sadness and the grim details that come with it is just incredibly surprising. And you do feel a connection when you dig deep into someone's life.
Right.
You really do feel like you know them, and then this whole other surprising layer comes with it. So
Yeah, you're so right about the fact that mental illness was a taboo, wasn't discussed, and unfortunately there wasn't a lot known about it in terms of we didn't have medication to help people who were depressed. I think that we had psychiatrists, but it was kind of rudimentary in terms of what help we could give to people who were depressed. And the stigma, I would imagine that a lot of people didn't acknowledge their depression, found ways to hide it or cope with it, and didn't seek medical care for it. So it was so shocking because, as I said, whenever you're working on a story and you're researching somebody's life, you kind of have a picture of what kind of person they were, and it certainly did not fit with her. And it's sad that after all she did for people, that there was no one there for her, and
at the end.
And it did make me understand how important her sister must have been in her life.
This great,
right?
She
they lived
provided
together.
great strength, probably.
Yeah, and just a friendship, right, and companionship.
Yeah.
And when she was gone, maybe there wasn't enough for her in terms of friendship. But she'll be remembered for all the great stuff she did. For helping those children in the polio ward, and for having the genius and the creativity to create this game that's brought so much joy to so many kids and families. And that's what we'll remember about Eleanor, not her cause of death. That's just a sad footnote.
The good far overpowers the sadness with this story. But on that note, the authors were also devastated, as we were just talking, to hear that Eleanor had also committed suicide. So let's hear what they had to say about it.
Candyland, it's just the opposite of that, like, she saw children suffering and she reached out for them and created this alternative world and escape for them. And then when it was time that maybe she needed somebody to alleviate her suffering, and that wasn't possible for her. So it was really sad and upsetting, but I think ultimately we decided that her life was bigger than this end and more important than this end. So I think after a while, once we processed it, we started refocusing back on how she spent her days, how she lived.
Yeah.
And she was incredibly generous. Like, we were talking about how much money she made. She gave so much of that away. She gave it away to victims of polio. She gave it away to San Diego schools in the form of equipment, buying school supplies for students. So in the end, like, that's more important than how you die is how you live. And I think that's the case for her.
So those authors are now creating a children's book called Candyland Lady, Eleanor Abbott, and the Surprising Story of the World's Sweetest Game. So Paul, what does this story mean to the Talmadge community?
It means so much because we have a wonderful community in Talmadge. It's not well known. For those of you who don't know, it's sort of near SDSU and Kensington, Normal Heights. And we're celebrating our 100th anniversary. The first map of the first properties in Talmadge was laid out 100 years ago. And what an amazing, wonderful contribution and coincidence we have that as we're honoring our neighborhood and the people who founded it, that we can add Eleanor to the list of quote unquote famous people who've lived in Talmadge. It's a short list because it's a small community, but actually probably the most famous CBS 8 reporter who in the history of the city, Harold Keene, who was in the 50s, 60s, 70s, an icon of journalism, lived in Talmadge. So he's one of them. But to have Eleanor's accomplishments and memories is really wonderful for our community. And I think that there is going to be an effort to have her home declared a historic site or in some way recognized, because in San Diego, we don't just recognize architecture or building, we recognize places where people lived.
Yep.
So I think it would be well worth the effort to see if the city can make Eleanor Abbott Day or Eleanor and Historic Talmadge Day or something to remember.
And it's so wonderful that the house is still standing and that they could one day make that a historic landmark.
Yes, I hope so. Some recognition of something that she did for all of us.
And we know this story means something special to you and the Talmadge community. Paul, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us to tell this story. And thank you for joining us. I'm Stephanie Simmons, and this is The Backstory.